Hi. Hi, everyone. I know that it's been a while since we've had a really good community call. Obviously, our schedules have all been really busy, so it's been really hard to schedule these and really get them going. So tonight's community hall is going to be about rape culture and white supremacy in the ranks. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about a lot of topics that are controversial, but it's these conversations are needed to happen for a lot of different reasons. But I'll get into that. For those of you who don't know, there is a marriage between white supremacy and rape culture, and I'm going to go back to a little bit in history to bring us to present day rape culture. I do want to let everyone know this is for mature audiences only. So let me put the mature branding on here because, someone will get upset that there's not branding on there for mature. So this is a mature conversation. Prepare for that. But totally feel free to engage and we'll have a dialogue. What I want to get started with in history is a little bit about my culture and also rape culture in general and white supremacy. So for those of you who are really, really love history, you probably understand that America's foundation is based on white supremacy, with imperialism. So from Europe, when Europeans were coming to America and they were essentially becoming American at that time, right? The colonists, white supremacy was a really big deal, and the oppression of Native Americans happened, right? And Native Americans, a lot of you should know about the Trail of Tears, where Native Americans were pushed out of the colonies, and now they're different tribes are in Oklahoma, North and South Dakota, New Mexico, and Arizona are some of the places where there's a lot of Native American tribes. A lot of them were where the 13 colonies were and were pushed out. When imperialism happened, especially in the Caribbean, during the phases where Christopher Columbus was essentially taking over, my family, part of my family is the oppressor and the oppressed. So my lineage and my heritage comes from something called mestizo children, which is a mixture of Spaniards and Taino Native Americans. That's my family heritage. So there are no Taino Native Americans left that are full Taino or people that embrace Taino culture. So my family essentially is a family that has been whitewashed over generations to fight oppression. Now, what happened during that time frame is when Christopher Columbus came during the first tour, there were no women at that time that were allowed on these expeditions. So essentially, what ended up happening was when these men settled in the Caribbean, they would take and rape Taino women, take them as forced wives, and rape them to then start families here against their will. And that has also happened here, in America. And that is how there are what's called mestizo children and people that are descendants of mixed cultural backgrounds. So that is my family heritage. So I have a mixture of that DNA and that heritage in my bloodline and my culture. So American history follows the same philosophy, and that's along with not only Native Americans, but also with African Americans. So Black people who were brought here as slaves, a lot of them were also raped. So the beginning of rape culture is rooted in white supremacy. And there is this non-for-profit organization that does amazing work that I want to show you. They're called Force. They're an art collective, and obviously, like, this is something that I would personally love because I like, how do I put this? I really like artwork that focuses on cultural issues that are happening. So let me see if I got it right here. So this is called Force, and then this not-for-profit is a collective of artists that focuses on the issue surrounding rape. So they put together this presentation that talks about rape culture and white supremacy and how they're married to each other and why they're married to each other. And it talks about some white supremacists that were also mass shooters, right? Dylan Wolf, James Jackson, Robert Louis Spear, and the three of these men who committed mass murders were also men who either had rape in their history or had some correlation to rape culture, that they believed that white men should be raping women in their belief system. This goes over their overall background, right, of white supremacy and rape culture, and what the backgrounds are, and how we categorize white supremacists and how they uphold rape culture. So generally, some of the things that uphold rape culture and white supremacy is that generally with these men in particular, we'll call them young, troubled Christian men who were lost. And their victims that they generally target will be minorities, and we will call those people extremists, thugs, predators, or that they're aggressive in nature. Now, the communities that are most vulnerable in America to rape is Black and Brown, Muslim, and LGBTQIA communities, as well as undocumented people, and also youth who live in impoverished areas. So the issues that are all connected to white supremacy directly, and white supremacy and sexual assault, is bombings is very common, racial profiling, sexual assault, mass incarceration, access to guns, and police violence. These are the 6 structures that uphold white supremacy. I am not going to go into all 6 today, but what I will tell you is a lot of the work that you will see me do directly with the movement, like Black Lives Matter or speaking out against police violence and mass incarceration, has to do with the fact that these are the 6 pillars that uphold white supremacy. And if you tackle one pillar but you leave the other 5, you don't tackle this system to fix it. So if you're not tackling racial profiling, police violence, access to weapons for those who commit domestic violence, mass incarceration, if you're not tackling those, and you're only looking at sexual assault as an isolated issue, then you cannot address sexual assault, right? It'll continue to persist because the other 5 pillars are still erected. And this is why when I'm leading the organization and the movement, that I focus on all of these different areas. So I will talk about racial profiling, mass incarceration, access to weapons if somebody has a history of domestic violence, police violence, mental health, because a lot of it is related to white supremacy and sexual assault, right? I think the only one that I haven't really talked about is mail bombings as part of that overall structure. But a lot of the times you will have seen that I have talked about 5 out of 6 of these pillars, which what I will say from what I know about the MST community as a whole and other organizations is they focus on one issue only, not understanding that white supremacy and rape culture are married, and that there's an entire structure that upholds white supremacy that allows sexual violence to exist. So I really love this educational slide that was put together. And I love how this organization put this in perspective as well, of while they're talking about rape culture, there's this slide in particular that I really like that also says a system of rules and cultural norms teaching us that we do not have the right to our own bodies and that rape is inevitable. It limits our freedom by teaching that any harm inflicted upon us is our fault. And the reason I love this slide so much is when it comes to our bodies and how we think about our bodies as a whole, a lot of times you will see people who will say things like, oh, if you wear that, you're inviting rape. If you're being nude, you're upholding sexual assault. If you're doing that, then you're triggering survivors and you're telling us that we deserve to be raped. You're sending the wrong message. You shouldn't be doing that. How dare you do that? And this becomes a part of rape culture, which is the public shaming of essentially saying that the cultural norms that persist, hold on, let me get that. The cultural norms that persist is saying that these are people who have a belief system in their mind where they're upholding rape culture. And they may consciously know it and they may not know it, right? Like that is all dependent on where someone's mindset is, their educational background. And the reason that there's a marriage between white supremacy and military sexual trauma is when we look at the statistics surrounding military sexual trauma, minorities experience sexual violence at the highest rate per capita. Women experience it at a higher rate per capita than men. And then when we look at minorities such as Black and Latinx communities, 40% of Black and Latinx communities will have gone through sexual violence in the military compared to white counterparts of 20 to 30% when the military is majority white. And then when we look at the LGBTQIA community, almost every person who's openly LGBTQIA has gone through sexual violence. And there's a marriage to white supremacy and rape culture. And all of those statistics are byproducts of white supremacy. So these are like these taboo ideologies that people just they don't want to talk about, right? Like there's this ideology that if you talk about it or you come across as talking about these things, then, you're bad. And I'll give you a perfect example. I have done in the last year probably 20 to 30 news interviews. And every single time a reporter has come out and asked me this question: what do you believe is the root cause of military sexual trauma? And why do you believe the problem has not been solved? And every single time I have responded, white supremacy in the ranks, and the homogeneous leadership at the top is all white males. And what they'll do in every news interview is cut out the white supremacy piece, right? Because it's too controversial to have that conversation in the public eye. And what they'll do is like a perfect example is if you look at the Pentagon report, I interviewed with them and they were talking about having a woman come into the Pentagon to be appointed by Biden. And when they interviewed me, they asked me, how do I think a woman would change things? And how do I think that would change MST in the ranks if a woman leads the Pentagon? And I said, I would prefer a female minority to lead in that position. However, having a woman is the first step to change the homogeneous leadership of white men in power. And that was after I said white supremacy in the ranks is the main cause of military sexual trauma and the reason it has not been addressed. So because those statements are generally controversial, they'll cut it out. But I always say that because that's the reality that we live in. And, I'm not someone who's, going to be walking around scared. Like, this is something I care about. This is a cause I'm willing to die for. And I'm willing to be honest in the process. So that's the reality of what's happening. And when someone is sending you messages that it's an isolated incident, it's something that's not really systemic. It's just something we haven't figured out how to tackle. It's a failure in leadership, not knowing what they're doing. They're meant to deal with war. They're not meant to deal with sexual violence. That is all false information to deflect from what the issues actually are. All of the statistics surrounding military sexual trauma, every single one of them points to white supremacy. If you look at every single statistic with statistics around retaliation, statistics around homelessness, statistics around substance abuse, statistics around lack of care, less care at the VA system, lack of being acknowledged for either pain or psychological issues that are happening, addiction issues that are happening, how sexual violence is handled in the military while someone's on active duty. Minorities are more likely to be put into the brig and that's even for nonviolent offenses, right? And that's something that has happened to me. And a lot of times when you look at people that are coming from a white background, they'll report sexual violence, they'll get transferred and then med boarded. But when you look at minorities, then you'll see how they'll talk about it. And if they fit into a minority category of being, let's say, homosexual or transgender, they're getting a retaliatory discharge. Then when you look at female minorities are typically put in the brig, whether it's for a violent offense or a non-violent offense. So a lot of times when you go through sexual violence, after you're developing a fight response in the military, you'll generally have a violent reaction, right, in a flashback, because you'll go through flashbacks, not know what's happening. And if you're not in the right treatment program, you will become violent when you have a flashback. So when we're looking at like the cases we're dealing with right now for Teu and Celeste Largo, that's their circumstances, right? And when we're putting that into perspective about what they're dealing with, both of those women who reported their sexual violence reported that they wanted to be transferred and not working with their attackers in their chain of commands, asked for medical treatment, and none of those things were upheld for them. And when they had flashbacks, they were put in the break. Right. In my case, they put me in for underage drinking, which is not even technically an offense, but that's just the way the military works, to then say you're a bad person. We're going to give you a retaliatory discharge because we're going to put you through hell unless you discharge and forfeit your benefits. And all of that is upholding white supremacy. Every single part of it is upholding white supremacy. And the reason why I am saying this with such affirmation is because until we decide to tackle white supremacy, military sexual trauma will persist. And part of that is we need more diverse leadership in senior levels of the government and senior levels of the Pentagon. The Joint Chief of Staff has been white since day one, right? We're talking about we're in 2020 and there's still never been anyone else other than white men in those roles. And those men, even some of those men, have histories of sexual violence. So you're going to tell me that there's people in the military who are career people in the military that are Black, that should have never made it to that spot, that don't have a history of military sexual trauma or attacking victims. And like, that's not true, right? Like, white people are not better at things because their skin is white. There's plenty of people that are better, that are more ethical, that come from diverse backgrounds, that have the ability to tackle these issues. And what we know for sure is when we have homogeneous leadership based on white supremacist thinking, there's no way that we can tackle MST. If this was true, then all of these past generations of white male leadership in the Joint Chief of Staff, in the Pentagon, would have fucking addressed this when these issues started coming up. And guess what we know? They have not. So there is a marriage between white supremacy, and when you look at military culture, the same symbols come down, right? The blaming the person who's been raped, blaming the person going through sexual violence, blaming the victims who are minorities and punishing them and letting the attackers go. All of that entire process, start to finish, is white supremacy. We have some comments coming in, so let me take a look. My punishment was always underage drinking by the same people feeding me the liquor and trying to get in my pants. Yes, but so that is white supremacy, right? And the reason why I want to say this is because punishing the victim historically, so like an example going back to Native American culture, is that what ends up happening a lot of times is that you victim blame the victim for what they're going through and the trauma that they're enduring. And you send them messages of, you're the bad person, you deserve this, when they're the people doing it to you. It's like, one of the main things I always think about is how you'll see a lot of people who are white supremacists say that minorities bring infectious diseases over, right? But when you look at who brought infectious diseases here, it's been white Europeans have been the ones who brought diseases here and literally killed off Native Americans via genocide using diseases. And, so it literally came from white Europeans and white supremacy that created infectious disease in the United States. And, a lot of times we hear and we'll be like one of the things I remember Trump saying was like, oh, look at these shithole countries and these people coming to America who are bringing diseases here. And it's like, no, it's generally Europeans that have brought diseases here. Like, that's generally, and it's generally affluent people who bring diseases because they travel the most. So like, one of the things when COVID first happened with a lot of early cases, you heard a ton of celebrities in the first couple months who ended up having COVID. You're talking about everyone from the Kardashians and Kanye West, all the way to Tom Hanks and his wife, and all these other celebrities that travel well before the average person got them. And what happens, a lot of these people in power, including Donald Trump, they spread it to all the people who work with them. So it's when we're looking at where diseases come from, it historically does not make sense to say that it comes from minorities. But what'll happen is they'll be blamed for catching those diseases and having it. And versus, looking at what's really happening, right? Or like, for instance, if you do look at the Kardashians and you see that they've been traveling, they're not wearing masks, they're having parties, they're doing everything that they normally would do while being in quarantine, and at the same time neglecting every single thing because they have the money and privilege to do so, but yet half of them have had COVID. And, you look at the majority of us where a majority of us haven't had COVID. So it's like the concept of privilege and people in power will turn around and say that it's people who are poor, it's people who are minorities, it's people who are disenfranchised are the causes of these problems. And in reality, we're not. And that connects to what you're saying, because the same person who's giving you alcohol, the same person who's, putting you in the position to be vulnerable and to rape you, then becomes the same person who's now like, oh, you know what, let's NJP you, let's put you in the brig because you're the problem, and never actually deal with the problem. And when you look at statistics surrounding military sexual trauma, a victim is 12 times more likely to receive a negative outcome than to see their attacker receive any kind of charge or any kind of negative outcome. That is white supremacy. That statistic alone proves white supremacy. Then we go down through every other statistic: minorities per capita, women per capita, retaliation. When we're looking at the statistics of homelessness and suicide and who's losing benefits, white supremacy. Every single statistic shows that it's an institution of white supremacy. And then when we take a step out, it's all white males, and it's all ever been white males. And guess what? The statistics and the leadership are married to each other, and the system of white supremacy allows that. So until we sit there and we say we're willing to have these uncomfortable conversations, we cannot adequately address military sexual trauma. We cannot end MST until we decide to say that enough is enough. We don't want white supremacy. We want diverse leadership in the military, and this has to stop. And we have to be willing to look at the whole structure, shake that shit up, shake it up and say enough is enough. We're done with this. Because how many generations have been trying to fight military sexual trauma, and none of them have succeeded? And I'm going to get into some legislation and some things that we've done and some pushback and things that we've had that fight white supremacy, and then what has happened as a result. I got unsuitably discharged after having to be hospitalized for depression and suicidal ideation. So that is that in and of itself is something that happens often. Like, it's much more common than I think what you're thinking about per se, because a lot of times when someone goes through sexual violence, if they're not immediately transitioned, into hospitalized care or like care for trauma for sexual violence, there's a lot of things that can happen to someone's mentality that lead to depression and suicidal ideation. Very, very common. It's unfortunate and it shouldn't be that way. But again, that has to do with the systems and the way that they're set up. That is sexism and not racism. There is a marriage between sexism and racism. There's a very strong marriage between sexism and racism. So if it was just sexism and there was no racism and discrimination, then the statistics surrounding MST would only be geared towards women. And the statistics with minorities would not exist. So if 40% of Black and brown people are going to experience military sexual trauma, and out of any ethnicity will experience it the most per capita, that is racism. So you might have experienced sexism, right? And you might have gone through that, but you may have not gone through racism. I'm very white and it was no better for me. Right, because white supremacy, so a lot of the stuff you're saying, I covered at the beginning of this, which you might not be able to see now because we're on live, but sexism and racism and discrimination are all married and tied to white supremacy. So you might have experienced one of those but that does not negate that there racism and discrimination exists, because people that are in the LGBTQIA community are at the most and the highest risk for retaliation. Black and brown service members will go through or report sexual violence at 40%, and that is much higher than what women per capita report. Right. So if you're looking at 1 in 3 women, that would be 33% of women versus the 40% of minorities that have gone through that. So when you're talking about it, there is a race thing that is involved, and white supremacy is involved in that. And if you are part of the LGBTQIA community, that puts you in a minority category, which also means you're at the most risk for discrimination. So that again points to white supremacy. So, your storyline or how you've processed that out as an individual, and then there's statistics of what the entire community looks like. But like I said, when you're looking at 1 in 3 women going through that, yes, that is sexism, right? That is sexism. But then when you're looking at the racism piece, 40% of minorities report going through sexual violence in the military. So racism is 100% tied into that. And then when you're looking at discrimination with the LGBTQIA community, that happens as well. You're also including men, and that's fine, but here we go with ignoring sexism. That's not ignoring sexism, right? Both of those, discrimination, racism, and sexism, are all pillars that are pieces of white supremacy. Each one of those pillars is what creates sexual violence. So there are 3 different structural issues that are tied to white supremacist thinking. So that's not ignoring any issue that happens, right? Like, we've continually spoken about all of those issues, and we're talking about all of those issues now. So a matter of ignoring one or the other, these are all issues that allow white supremacy to happen, and there's thinking behind it that causes sexism. There's thinking behind it that causes discrimination. There's thinking behind it that causes racism. So, like, the best way that I can put that into perspective is, let me give you, and I'll give you a perfect ideology that really upholds sexism that I think you might relate to, that I can completely relate to. Public shaming. We're going to talk about this because this is something that happens all the time in the veteran community. So one of the things that you'll see a lot or very often, and it's happened with me consistently, is the public shaming with my body. So, like, people will say, for instance, oh, why are you naked? Why are you naked in fundraising that way? Why are you naked on this ad? Why do you feel that nudity does anything? Why do you feel to do it that way? You shouldn't be doing that. You can't do that. Why are you wearing that? Why does your hair look like that? Why are you going to court with your outfit like that? Why are you wearing those colors? Why is your makeup like that? Why is your body language like this? Why is your hair like that? You're inviting men. You're inviting the wrong people. All of those ideologies of public shaming are victim blaming, and every single one of those ideologies is rooted in white supremacy and sexism. Because when we look at men, for instance, right, whoever says that to men, whoever says that to men, you know how many congressmen have posed nude? You know how many congressmen have gone out with 45 different women and vetted 10 different women at the same time, and they're still in office? Do you know how many of them committed sexual violence and ended up president? So the idea is that, like, we hold men to a different standard than what we hold women to. And that's a really good example of how white supremacy is, because when we're looking at, hold on, let me see this. Sexism is not related to white supremacy. 100% it is. Every statistic surrounding sexism, racism, and discrimination, every single one of them ties to white supremacy. I think for what's going to happen with this, because I don't know if on this Facebook Live you can go back while I'm on live, because a couple of people have told me you can't. At the end of this, when we're off, you can watch the whole thing from the beginning. I spoke about the marriage between all of them, and I also spoke about an organization called Force, an art collective that helps people to understand the marriages between these issues. They use art to help people understand the marriages and the statistics surrounding that. No one says that to men of color either. Men of color have a lot of systemic issues, and that's another pillar of white supremacy. So a lot of men of color actually deal with mass incarceration at the highest rate per capita. And also will deal with police brutality and police violence at a much higher rate per capita. So when we're looking at issues that men of color deal with, it may be different and look different regarding sexism, right? Because sexism, racism, and discrimination are not the same. However, the outcomes and what happens to each oppressed category of person, each vulnerable class, is rooted in white supremacy. So they all come from the same thing, but they're problems that stem from the same thing. Again, in the beginning of this video, I showed the 6 pillars of white supremacy, and you'll see, mass incarceration and police brutality as the pillars that men of color typically face. And also, women of color do face those. Women of color face every single category, like just hands down. But just because the issues surrounding sexism typically deal with women, the issues surrounding racism and discrimination, those issues all persist. So someone who, let's say, is like, I'll give you an example. Someone who is transgender in the military who's also Black may go through certain adversities that a white straight woman wouldn't deal with. Both of them could go through MST, but the way they get handled is totally different. One could get med boarded, or the other one could be given hospital care, and the other one's getting, reports, and then all of a sudden is getting kicked out for the transgender ban. There's different obstacles, or like one of the things that happens a lot in the military, especially in the Marine Corps, is that if a woman of color reports sexual violence, she is more likely to be incarcerated than a white woman or a white man who comes forward. 100%. So there are a lot of issues that do happen. Again, Kim, I think the best thing to do is when this video is over, to go back to the beginning, because I know that during the Facebook Live, because I think Corey, hold on, there's a lot of messages coming in. Corey said, like, you can't go back. That happened in another video, but the beginning of this video covers the foundation for the conversation we're having. Men have too much of say in the writing. Well, yeah, that has happened historically, and that is true, right? Like, women have definitely made 50% of history, but they're only documented in like 18%. And that's another issue with sexism for sure, and like the idea that women should be subservient and modest. They have a lot of issues, but it's separate, and men of color absolutely practice extreme sex. So from personal experience, I can tell you women also participate in sexism and also participate in upholding white supremacy. So I'll give you perfect examples. If you ever go back to the posts on this page, on the MST movement page, keep scrolling until you find nudes on the page, and you will see how many women uphold sexism. Do you know how many women are like, you should not be posting this post and be naked? You should not be talking. I understand you're talking about rape, but you should not be dressed like that. You should not be naked. You should not be doing this. And the reality of it is, freedom and liberation means each individual has agency over their body, right? And that means that you can do whatever you want to that makes you feel good and that makes you feel empowered. That looks different for everybody, right? Like, I like provocative clothes. I like to be sexy. That makes me feel good. Where someone else does not feel that way. You don't see me going around telling women like, oh, you're too modest. You're too whatever. Like, I'm like, girl, like, you look beautiful however you want to be. Because like, whatever you identify as, that is authentic to who you are is what is good for you. So like, you might like BDSM. You might like kinky sex. I'll tell you about a lot of stuff I learned in the movement. So I never, but when the movement started, I didn't know the movement was going to be queer. Let me start with that. I had no idea. I had an idea that we would attract a lot of women. I had an idea that we would attract a lot of minorities, because I understood based on my own experience that a lot of it was based on white supremacy. but I didn't understand how the LGBTQIA community was impacted based on white supremacy, other than like what happened at Stonewall Inn, right? I like didn't have the level of education I have now. So I start the movement. Let me grab a drink because I'm talking so much. Okay. So I start the movement, and all of a sudden, boom, the whole movement, like people start getting to know me, right? And one by one, people are like telling me their sexual identity. And I learned a lot. Like, we have people that are asexual, we have people that are swingers, we have people that are voyeurs, expeditions, whatever. Like, there's so many different categories for sexuality and how people express their sexuality, which I didn't know. Like, I knew that like my freakiness was like like my kink, right? Like, I knew about my kink or whatever, but I didn't realize how broad spectrum the LGBTQIA community is, and like people that are, we have drag kings, drag queens, we have people that are homosexual, we have people that are bisexual, we have people that are pansexual. And like, I didn't really know the depth of all that because I'm straight. So like, I knew like my little kind of kinks that have happened with my trauma, and things that are related to that. But I didn't really have this understanding. Start the movement, and all of a sudden, like everybody, little by little, as I get to know them, what I start to realize is the whole movement's queer, and the minority is actually straight people in the movement. But even when we're talking about kinks, the whole movement has kinks. So it's like I start getting to learn about everyone. And when I learn about everyone, I start researching and learning about sexual violence against the LGBTQIA community. And I really like deep dove into this and started participating in like the transgender community, like the sub communities of the LGBTQIA community. And I started talking to veterans, and like I started meeting people who were, went through sexual violence, reported it, got kicked out because they were homosexual. And then I learned about people that were transgender, went through MST, and then were kicked out for being transgender. So like I start learning all this, and then that led to the formulation of the Restoration of Honor Act. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's the first legislation in U.S. history that protects veterans who have a retaliatory discharge due to reporting MST, protects minority veterans who are disabled, and it protects against discrimination against the LGBTQIA community. So veterans that fit into any of those categories who've been discriminated against in the state of New York can apply for a discharge upgrade, and the state of New York will restore the benefits to them. And in New York State, if you fit into any of those categories, it is illegal for a non-for-profit organization or for anyone to deny you benefits, including housing, schooling, anything of that nature. That is the first legislation in U.S. history to ever have done this. And the reason that happened was because when I became educated on what was happening, when the Restoration of Honor Act was designed as the no bad paper bills, I was working with Dee Dee Baird's office. And at that time that I was working with her, we had these conversations about what was happening systemically, and that, we agreed that we wanted legislation that was robust enough to address all these issues, and that we wanted to do bold legislation that would address these problems so that New Yorkers would be protected. And what I will tell you for sure is protection for the LGBTQIA community was the hardest part of the legislation to get approved. Pretty much everyone was on board with helping, MST survivors. Everyone was on board with helping veterans with TBI and PTSD. But when it came to the LGBTQIA community, there was a divide in the Senate because the Senate in New York State is Republican. They did not want benefits. So there became this huge battle of like, do you care about veterans? Or now do we care about veterans' sexual identity and we only think certain veterans should get protected? So getting that legislation approved in its entirety, it took it was about 6-7 months of this back and forth of really trying to get that done before that manifested. And then it was ironic because then Cuomo came out and was like, this legislation's for the LGBTQIA veterans, and it's the first in history. And it's like, it was actually MST legislation. And because we practice intersectional justice, that means that we look at all the problems and statistics that lead to these issues. So that was the reason for those changes going through, which led to a historical legislation being passed that protects everyone. And this also leads to the I Am Vanessa Guillen Act. And the reason why I'm going to say this is because a lot of the MST community in and of itself does not practice intersectionalism until it benefits them. And I'm going to explain this to you. So when the I Am Vanessa Guillen Act when it first got introduced, and we were looking at the legislation, the House Armed Services Committee staffers told us that we were the only organization to bring up gender identity as a protection, and that because we were talking about intersectionalism, right? That's one of our values in the organization. And when we brought that up, we were also the hardest and last organization to sign on to the I Am Vanessa Guillen Act. And it was strictly because of the gender identity was not covered. And the reason they didn't want to cover it was because they felt that the Senate and Congress would not even, that Mitch McConnell would not even let it go to the floor, and that the Senate Armed Forces Committee would not put it through. So we had this conversation, and when we were talking to the House Armed Services Committee about this, they told us that not one other MST organization brought that up. Not one other, every other MST organization that went on and signed on and signed on to that bill, every single one of them just signed on as is and did not give two fucking shits about any of the LGBTQIA community or protections for people in the LGBTQIA community. That tells me two things. You don't give a shit, or you only care when it benefits you, or two, you're not educated in the actual issues surrounding military sexual trauma that happen. So you don't care, you don't know. And either one of those representing survivors of sexual trauma, especially when it comes to legislation, it needs to be intersectional. And this is what I think is ironic about this. So Sage Vets is an organization for LGBTQIA veterans in New York, and Protect Our Defenders does a lot of work on the legal side. What I think is ironic about both of those organizations is Sage Vets, when the Restoration of Honor Act came through, they started passing on that legislation as a big achievement for the LGBTQIA community without ever acknowledging the intersections of minorities and how MST actually happens, right? But they took that as a win for themselves, and then they were like, we're diverse and we're, whatever. And then Protect Our Defenders, if you've seen their marketing campaign lately over the last month or so, all of a sudden, never before did they have any diverse marketing related to minorities, especially LGBTQIA, veterans and service members. But now they're educating their community on the statistics, which I think is great. But when it came down to the I Am Vanessa Guillen Act, their organization had nothing to say when it came to having gender identity and protections in that act. And like they didn't even put up an argument about it. They just signed on to it. So like my thing about it is there's so many organizations that either don't know or that don't care, or that wait until it benefits them and their organization in the public eye, and then they're on board with it. And the reality of it is like, you're not doing anything to resolve the problems then, right? You're just jumping on the bandwagon to jump on the bandwagon when it feels good and when the idea is already popular, right? Like at that point, legislation's already been passed for 3 years on what this act looks like and what it does. And this was already in the process for the last 3 years. This conversation was already had. Or like, how many communities halls we've had with people that are bisexual, that are pansexual, that are homosexual. Like we've had so many different people on our transgender, and we've featured all of these people, and we've come out and we've told their stories. And you know how many complaints that I received about doing that, when I'm like, no, that's the issue at hand. We're standing our ground on this. And the reason why I'm saying this is that there's so many people and organizations that will jump on the bandwagon when it's cool. And it's like, but you're doing nothing to actually resolve the problems. So that happens a lot. And the conversation I'm having is, at MSTM, we are here to end MST. And in order to do that, it's understanding the issues and knowing when to stand up and when to fight and when to raise our voice and say something. we might not win on everything, right? Like we had that conversation with Congress and they still said they didn't want to put gender identity in. And they were like, we're not doing that because we don't think the Senate's going to do it. We were lobbying the Senate, and when we saw where the Senate was at, we were like, we're going to hold back until Biden gets put in, until a new office gets put in, and then we're going to go forward with this because we need to protect everyone. And it's not only protecting white women, it's not only protecting white men. There's plenty of other categories of people who are vulnerable who need to be protected. But we cannot really dive into tackling and ending military sexual trauma until we're willing to look at the problem and the root of it. And that's what I'm trying to get to in this conversation, is that the reality of it is that a lot of people just they don't know where to go with it. We have more comments coming in, so let me go back to answering some of these. They have a lot of issues, but it's separate, and men of color absolutely practice extreme. Okay, so this is the point I was trying to get to with you before, is everybody, there's plenty of people, it does not matter your background, but there's plenty of people that uphold sexism. And what I was getting to is like, if you go back to scroll in the feed, you know, what I will tell you from my experience is men of color have been the best, like some of the best allies to the movement in many ways. I'm not saying that they don't do that. I'm saying that there are, for us, the most understanding group for us has been men of color. What I will tell you from experience dealing with sexism is that women in the military are the worst. They're worse than men. They're worse than white men. Like, and I'm talking about women and women of color who uphold sexism. To tell another woman how to present her body, whether it's in an organization or as an individual, no one has the right to do that. Like, so when you're telling any woman, like, if you want to be involved in the sex trade and that's what you want to do, that's your prerogative, right? And someone slut shaming you for doing that is upholding rape culture. Because if the guy wanted to put his dick everywhere, no one would care. People are like, oh, you slept with 35 women in 35 hours. Oh my God, what a pimp. I want you too. And then it's like, you're naked and you're like, well, I'm raising money for a cause. And they're like, how dare you? How dare you do this? You're the worst individual ever. And what I'm trying to tell you is plenty of people, especially in the veteran community, uphold sexism. And they will uphold it until all of a sudden it's not the popular idea anymore. And plenty of people do many things that uphold rape culture. Like, you know how many people have told me that I got a DM the other day, right? That basically was like, I don't know how you're helping survivors. Like, you're a slut for posting these pictures. And I was like, who the fuck are you for even saying this to me? Right? Like, who do you think you are? And I'm the kind of person that I'm like, bye girl. Like, and that was a white woman. And that's a white woman who's a veteran who was like, I served in here for 20 years and like you just look like a slut and you look like a slut, like just slutting yourself around to get yourself attention. And I'm like, the fact that you would even say that tells me that you're brainwashed and you're brainwashed into upholding rape culture. So like, I'm not going to engage with you, right? Because your level of consciousness is not there. And that is how a lot of the MST community is. A lot of it. And a lot of organizations in the MST community are like that. And what I'm trying to say about it is like, when you go through sexual violence, your power is taken away. And when your power is taken away and your sexuality is taken away and you're dealing with all of these obstacles, your self-worth is taken away. And you have to go through a journey of healing. And when you go through that journey, everyone's journey looks unique. But when you're on that journey of figuring yourself out, eventually at some point, if you make it there, there's going to be this point that you heal. And when you work towards healing, you're going to reclaim your sexuality. And how you choose to do that could be a wide variety of things. It could be you were straight at one point and then you decided to turn homosexual. Plenty of people in the movement have done that. Or maybe, for instance, you ended up liking voyeurism, right? Like now you like sex in front of people because that's your thing. Maybe you want to end up in the sex trade because you want to. Maybe it's by choice instead of not, and that makes you feel empowered. Maybe you're going to pose nude. Maybe you're going to raise money that way. Whatever you do with your sexuality that you consent to is whatever makes you feel empowered with yourself and helps you reclaim your identity. And whatever path you choose with your own sexuality that's consensual, you should do, right? Whatever that is. And no one has a right to tell you after you went through someone taking away your power, shaming you, going through the hardships of military sexual trauma, going through homelessness, dealing with substance abuse, having to go into the sex trade because you didn't have a choice. And then now you decided, hey, this is what makes me feel good and empowered. And people are like, no, don't do that. Don't do that because you make the rest of us look bad. It's like, no, it's like, shut the fuck up and get in your corner. You know what I mean? Because whatever, if it does not align with you and it does not make you feel good, don't fucking do it. But like, who are you to tell every other survivor that they have to be like you? Because again, when you're even looking at sexuality, survivors not only get split into their sexual identity, but they can become hyposexual or hypersexual. So just because someone who's saying that might be hyposexual does not mean that someone who's hypersexual and now has learned to master their sexuality and appreciates that they're like that and accepts that for who they are, they have a right to express themselves however they feel. And the reality of it is, if you don't like it and it doesn't work for you, then you don't do that, right? Like, you don't tell other people and you don't shame other people for doing that. And the reality of that is that when people do that, they're upholding rape culture. And what they're upholding is white supremacy inadvertently. They're upholding white supremacy because they're saying, hey, this is okay. This is how it should be. And because you don't fit into that category, shame you. You're bad. Who are you to do that? And when people do that, they're part of the problem. And that's why when it comes to public shaming, especially in the veteran community, you got to pick and choose. You got to pick and choose what makes sense, right? And, you know, one of the things for me personally, like, even with me posing nude, is like, I am someone who likes to challenge the status quo. Like, I'm not somebody who's like, let me come in and politically, tactically figure out how to do this. I'm like, I'm gonna shake the fucking establishment up. It should have been like this for 400 fucking years. And I'm like, in my lifetime, this shit is getting fixed. And I'm like, I'm gonna shake that shit up to its motherfucking core. Like, I'm gonna make you fucking think, and I'm gonna challenge your thought process. And the reality is, when you have people who uphold white supremacy who are like, this doesn't make me feel comfortable. It doesn't, this conversation, like this whole messaging doesn't make me feel like, was sexual violence supposed to like, this conversation was supposed to fucking make you feel comfortable, really? Because if you're comfortable having a conversation with sexual violence and you have to have boundaries on how that conversation works, then you're restricting the honesty and authenticity in these conversations. This is why the movement does not censor stories. This is why the movement does not censor people's bodies and how they want to present themselves. Again, that is everybody's choice. And we don't tell people what to do with that. How you present yourself is your choice. All right, now we have a whole nother slew of more stuff. Hold on. I'm not doing. I mean, everybody, this is, again, I always tell people if it aligns with your values, right? Because we're not changing our values. We're a movement, we're a political organization, we're here to challenge the status quo. There are plenty of congressmen who are in Muscle Magazine, have appeared nude. Like, some of the, you know how many congressmen have passed out on drugs and have still held their positions? So it's a culture of sexism. But the thing is, like, everyone has a choice. If this doesn't, what we do, if it does not morally align with you, then we're not for you, right? That's really how I put it. Because the reality is, we're here to shake up the establishment. We're here to challenge the status quo. And whenever you're doing that, you're going to face adversity and you're going to face the thinking that wants to uphold the status quo. So when you're challenging the status quo, you're gonna meet the people who are gonna be like, you can't do that. Or, oh, shame on you for being like this. You're a horrible fucking person. And then you're like, what the fuck are you doing behind your computer screen? You know what I mean? So, like, you have to choose what path in your life is best for you and how to get involved in activism. And we take strong progressive stances that generally lead the community. We were the first organization to put up a fight and put legislation forward that got approved and went into effect that made history, that included the LGBTQIA community. No other organization came out at that time and did that until we passed legislation. And then 10 other states got inspired to do so in the last 3 years. So now you'll see plenty of organizations getting on board because public image says that it's the right thing to do. And but other than that, that never happened before. And when we got attacked for doing that, I was like, bring it, bring it. I don't care because like I'm not scared of a good fight. I am not scared of a good fight. I will fight, especially when there's intersectional fights and the fight that we're facing or the fight that I'm going through is happening more severe to the LGBTQIA community. Like I'm not leaving them behind. So, but I'm also not going to wait until it's popular or like sexuality and how people handle sexuality. No other organization talks about sexuality in the way that we do. No other organization talks about body image, talks about and like literally like the good, bad, and ugly of all of these topics. And like we do that because we're at the forefront of it, right? Like we're innovative, we're controversial, we're at the forefront of change, and we're willing to have these hard conversations. And guess what? Survivors come on here all the time and talk about the different aspects of their stories and the taboos that they've dealt with. So, you know, being authentic is far more important than public image or people liking you. And this gets to the public shaming part. If you care more about public image and what people think of you versus what your moral convictions tell you, then the movement is not right for you, right? If you care about your imaging and you want to do what's cool and what's popular, that's not being a leader. That's just following the bandwagon when it's cool. So you can get your dollars coming in and people could like you and you can gain your affluence. If you really give a shit about people, you'd be willing to fight for them as a whole. And you would put that fight forward at whatever the cost is. So, when it comes to public shaming, you have choices that you have to make when you're deciding what to do. Let me just see some more comments coming in here. Whoa, okay. I mean, I'm happy that everyone's talking. This is like a whole conversation. There's a okay, so I'm glad everyone's having a conversation. These are coming in so quickly that I don't even know where to start. I'm trying to find. I'm not shaming. They're separate, and yet women and LGBTQ there and our interrelations for sure. Again, I'm gonna watch the whole video from the beginning when this is done because we covered the intersectionalism. There is intersectionalism with all groups of people, and white supremacy is literally about oppressing every single other group of people. The best way that I could explain that is American imperialism, back to Native Americans on the Trail of Tears being oppressed, slavery, Black people being oppressed, having to work for 400 years without making money. Or like when they got involved in politics, they burned the politicians in Wilmington, North Carolina who were Black. They burned their political buildings and murdered everyone who's part of their caucus. You look at Black Wall Street, the same thing. That was all done by white people. So to say that Black people or brown people don't go through these adversities, they do, because then when you convert it to MST at a higher rate per capita, minorities, Black and brown people are at the highest rate per capita to experience sexual trauma. It's the same thing. It literally is white supremacy that has evolved and now it's suited in the ranks. And again, it's about leadership that's white, male, and homogeneous, and that upholds the roots of white supremacy. It's 100% what it is. Again, it is a complicated topic, and I covered that at the beginning. So just for time's sake, I don't have the time to reiterate that, but if you go back to the beginning, you can totally take a look at that. 1000%, that's a statement I'm on board with. I think women are the worst, especially in the veteran community, for upholding rape culture and white supremacy. And that is the biggest problem, because until women start realizing, like educating themselves on rape culture and white supremacy and the ideologies that uphold it, how are we going to have change? Because the reality of it is, if women are upholding white supremacy and rape culture because it benefits them and gives them some sort of protection or helps them feel part of the brotherhood, they're limiting progress. So it's like, and that's the thing, when people come and they say things like, what am I going to say to them? Like when I'm getting a message and people are like, you're a hoe, you're a slut for doing that, blah blah blah. Like I'm not going to be like, look at you upholding white supremacy. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's no point in engaging with that person and having that conversation. It's a matter of like, I hope you find self-discovery. Namaste. You know what I mean? Like I hope you figure it out, because I have, and like I'm not going to participate in this dialogue. I have had women insist and most of them lie about rape. Yeah, girl. Okay, so this is where we can relate. So not only have I had that happen, but even being in the military, that's happened. And then the first time I ever came out and spoke, so this is one of the things I was going to talk about with public shaming. The first time, every single part of the movement, I have been publicly shamed, and not hasn't only been by men; it's predominantly been by female Marines, predominantly. So the first time I came out and told my story, right? And my story, there's an abundance of fucking evidence. Like every little thing that has ever happened to me in the Marine Corps, documentation. I document motherfucking everything. So my sexual assaults are documented. My medical stuff got documented one way or another. Like mad shit. All my shit's documented. So people, when I first told my story, do you know how many female Marines were like, these guys from Marines United came out, and obviously they are white supremacists. They have an interest in upholding white supremacy in the ranks, right? That is Marines United. So anyway, what happens is they start coming on my feed, and and I don't even know who they are at this time. At this time, I had no idea who Marines United was, other than maybe reading about them in one article. But I came out and I told my story. And when I told my story, all of a sudden they start flooding my feed, and all these female Marines start getting on my feed. And you know what they start saying? They're like, your story is not real. Oh, that didn't happen. Oh, you're just doing that for attention. Then I start the movement. And then people are like, oh, you're just doing that for attention. Then I leave my job to run the movement full time, because I'm like, I really care about this. Put my life on the line multiple times for the movement, because there's plenty of shit that happens behind the scenes that people don't know about. To the point that people from Marines United plans an attack at my job to literally kill me. This happens. Not only is it in court documents that this happened, but my job had to hire armed security guards for this happening. And people are like, that didn't really happen. Oh, your job. Oh, yeah, no. Yeah, no. One of the largest firms in the fucking world hired armed security guards for no reason. You know what I mean? So, like, that is women who are upholding rape culture all the way. Like that, they'll do that till they die. You know what I mean? And that's the biggest problem in that I see in the veteran community is women upholding rape culture and not educating themselves to understand how they uphold rape culture, and them participating in the public shaming, them participating in working with Marines United. Like you'd be surprised how many of them will work with them because they agree with their ideologies. And it's fucking sick. It's sick. It makes me sick to my stomach that there's women like that. And like, I'm not gonna stop what I'm doing because of white supremacists. Like, no, like that shit needs to rock. Like diversity in America is the future, and it should be here already, right? Like we don't harm other communities because they look different. We don't treat other communities bad because they look different. Everybody deserves equal treatment, start to finish. And that's just something that I live my life by. Yeah, I read that too. Because it's very common. And white supremacy in the ranks is what leads to this happening. And that's what I'm trying to say. It's not only white men that uphold white supremacy. There's an entire infrastructure that upholds white supremacy. An entire infrastructure that does that. And like I said, until we deal with that, we can't effectively end MST. White gay men tend to be oppressive towards everyone else. So I have heard that, and I would not be surprised, because especially men that are white and gay can cover their sexuality. They don't have to be out. And if they're not out, you'll never know. So that's something that's very possible. And like I said, there's plenty of other people. There's women that uphold rape culture. You know, there's Black people that uphold rape culture. I've dealt with that too, and you know, and that has happened. So you know, it is not this like simple, it's not a simple solution, or it's not only white men that uphold white supremacy. There's a lot of people that get brainwashed into upholding white supremacy, a lot. Like that is the entire Marine Corps. Do you know how many women I dealt with in the Marine Corps when I was going through sexual violence, who knew I was going through sexual violence and literally continued to facilitate it? Like I got physically assaulted by a woman because I refused to engage in the sexual violence that was happening to me. And I got into a motherfucking fist fight with her. I knocked her fucking ass out. And like, she was someone who fucking upheld rape culture 100% and upheld white supremacy. And I will never forget that, because that was like one of the first times in my life that a white woman so blatantly did shit like that to me when I was in a vulnerable position. And then after that happened and I reported it, another white woman was telling me this is the culture, and you know, really kind of persuade me not to report. And then another white woman fucking locked me in a room for 15 hours and starved me and interrogated me. Then when I went UA and came back and got raped after I already dealt with sexual violence, another woman who's doing my interrogation, is the way she's asking me the questions is for me to put blame on myself. And I remember just sitting there and I'm like, I don't want to talk. Like, I don't remember half of this. I don't want to talk to you. I got interrogated 4 fucking times by this woman. And that was when I really started getting to a point that I was like, all these fucking women are the same. Like, they're all building out their careers, and they know for them to get ahead, they have to uphold white supremacy, because the top of the food chain is all white men. So they have to bow down to that shit. And like, that's just the unfortunate reality of it. And that is the reason that the movement is as progressive as it is, because like that ideology has to get tackled. And this is a sad reality, but it's true. White women are more likely to get ahead just for the fact that they're white in any organizations that are ran by white men over women of color. So if white women are upholding white supremacy, then you're forcing women, minorities who are coming up the ranks to mold into that ideology for their own survival. And that's why I'm telling you that there's plenty of other people who, when they're dealing with that to try to get ahead in their career field, who are going to uphold white supremacy. So until we have open and honest conversations about how to tackle these issues, they're not going to get tackled unless someone brings them to light, right? This is why we have these conversations. Right. I mean, it is on them for upholding those ideologies and not being conscious and being on the wrong side of history. However, I think a lot of people are self-interested and just don't give a shit. Like, how many commandants have we had and there's still things going on and they just don't impress it? You know what I mean? Um, yeah, it's messed up when you start piecing the puzzles together, right? When you start putting the dots together, you're like, this whole system is fucked. But like, I hope that that helps you understand why we take the stances that we do, right? And why we take hardline stances and why we challenge the status quo the way we do. Like, not participating in none of that. Like, you know, it's just not things. I want to go with y'all to Washington after the regime change. I mean, we definitely do an annual trip to Washington, D.C. So, you know, the next trip that we have, it's just right now, we just came back from Washington, D.C. So I don't know the next trip yet, because we also moved a lot of stuff this year virtually. Like, we changed a lot of the things we were doing. But if it's something you're interested in, what I will tell you is you got to sign up to volunteer. So you can talk to one of our volunteers, just DM the movement, and we can work on you with that, because we only bring volunteers with us to DC. We're really absolute the worst. Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think there's a lot of women, you know, I think until we have women whose consciousness elevates and women in positions of power are willing to challenge the status quo and use their power versus submitting to, you know, these harmful ideologies. Yeah, those women will harm other women coming after them until they're willing to fight it head on. I served with one man of color in the Coast Guard beauty station. He was always getting in trouble for stupid stuff, and he was one of my allies on the job. Yeah, I mean that happens. And just to let you know, like the reason even like knew that I got raped was because of a black sergeant who he knew that the guy who was trying to rape me, this gunnery sergeant, he knew he was trying to rape me, and I was passed out. I was unconscious because I got roofied. So it was alcohol, and I got roofied with a bunch of different sleeping pills. So I was totally unconscious. And he knew something was up because the gunnery sergeant said he was taking me to my room because I was unconscious. And he ended up following us upstairs. And like, I didn't know about this till after the fact until the reports, but he was knocking on the door and he found me naked and found out that he raped me and then like put clothes on me. And the only clothes that the gunnery sergeant gave me was his underwear, his wife beater, and his boxers. He picked me up and brought me to his room. And the gunnery sergeant told him that I wanted it. But when I was downstairs, he knew I was unconscious. And um, the gunnery sergeant told him that he was taking me to my room. How fucked is that? And then the Marine Corps told me after all of the results came in and everything was fucking positive, they're like, you weren't raped. You wanted it. And I was like, are you fucking kidding me? Are you fucking kidding me? I was like, fuck all of you. Fuck all of you. And now here I am running a movement. Okay, so there's like a whole offshoot of other stuff going on. So you don't know. Let me see. That person is jealous and, like you said, brainwashed. How dare they think of yourself? Well, that's why I said, like, so this is what I was talking about with public shaming or like shaming in general is that when people say things about you, you can care about what someone else thinks or you can know yourself, right? And if you sit there and you listen to other people over getting in touch with yourself, then what ends up happening is you succumb to bowing down to everyone for fear of what those people think of you. And in that case, you'll never be liberated. And how are you going to find healing? If your identity is tied to what every other human thinks about you, how are you going to heal? And how are you going to find yourself? And how are you going to find what makes your soul happy? And that's one of the things that I get to with sexuality is like the same way you eat food and food makes you happy because you need it to survive. Sex is needed for survival. It's literally the reproduction of entire of humanity. If all of us stopped having sex, there would be no fucking humans. So the reality of it is like reproduction is just as necessary as food is. Just as necessary. That's why we have hormones. That's why we want sex. That's why all this shit happens to begin with. So, like, to deny your sexuality and act like you never have it is literally to suppress a part of your personality. And if you're suppressing a part of your personality because you're scared you're going to get raped, or you're scared that someone's going to harm you, or you're scared what people think of you, all of that upholds rape culture and white supremacy. Because everybody should be able to express their sexuality how they feel and feel empowered in that and also feel safe. And when people challenge that and tell you that you should be scared and tell you that you shouldn't express your sexuality and you shouldn't be doing that, what they're telling you is that you should be oppressed and that they want to hold power over you. And no one should have power over your identity. Your identity is who you are. And whatever makes you feel good and makes your soul feel happy, do that. And you know what? The public shaming is going to come with it because people are always going to try to tear you down, whether you tell your story for the first time, whether you come out and you run a movement, whether you come out and you start speaking publicly, whether you're engaging with an audience, whether you're doing no matter what you do, there's always going to be somebody who's upholding the system as it is because it benefits them. And that's just the reality of it. You have a choice that on your path to healing, you're going to become your best self. You're going to heal and your identity and who you are is going to become so strong. It's like a force field that when people come at you, it's just like bing, 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 bing. And you're like, go back in your corner. Like nobody cares. You know what I mean? So like when you tie yourself and you become this whole person, whether or not you have a disability, right? Because you can still have your disability and still be a whole functioning person and love yourself. You don't have to hate yourself and your sexuality because you went through sexual violence. You can love yourself. You can love everything about yourself. And you can love the way your sexuality evolves. You don't have to let your trauma define you, because self-hate is what will lead you to go down a destructive road. So your choice after going through sexual violence is to learn to love yourself. And in that process of learning to love yourself, it's accepting things about yourself, like your sexuality, accepting how that's emerged, accepting who you're becoming, and how you want to express yourself in the world. All of those things is healing to your soul. And no one has a right to tell you how you should be, because all that does is uphold the ideologies with sexual violence. So it's like you should stand up to that and you should fight back and you should tell people to fuck off, because no one should be telling you how your identity is. No one tells you what to eat, right? Like no one's telling you what to put in your mouth. No one's telling you what color clothes to wear. So no one should be telling you what to do with your sexuality and your body. Your body is yours. So you have a right to do whatever makes you feel good and whatever makes you feel happy and whatever makes you feel whole. Do that and do that 100 times over. And whatever that is for you, you deserve to be happy here on earth. You deserve to live a good life. You deserve that. And when anyone is telling you different, they're coming from a non-healed place. They're coming from a place of oppression, and they're coming from a place of harm. And you don't need to engage in that. I mean, I agree. Right. So that's what I was saying before, is like it doesn't matter if you're like what color you are, what if like a lot of people from all different backgrounds uphold white supremacy. Right. Well, you'd be surprised. Do you know how many messages I get where people are like, I'm really uncomfortable about this conversation? And I'm like, there's, do you think telling my life story is comfortable? Do you think me running a political movement, putting all my shit out there is comfortable? Do you think me going to Washington, D.C. to talk about sexual violence is comfortable? Do you think me getting on social media to talk about this is comfortable? Do you think me going through PTSD is comfortable? Do you think me going through miscarriages are comfortable? Do you think me going through suicidal ideation is comfortable? Do you think drug addiction was comfortable? Do you think me having to go to therapy was comfortable? None of that shit was comfortable. I'm not here to motherfucking make you comfortable. Like, I am not here to help white people feel comfortable. I am also not here to help anybody who upholds white supremacy to feel comfortable. I give no fucking shits about how those people feel. I'm going to tell people like it is. If I'm going to do anything with my life, anything at all, it's going to be telling you the real authentic account of what it is like to be a survivor who goes through military sexual trauma. And I'm going to tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly of it. And I'm going to tell you all of that shit uncensored. I'm going to tell you every single part of it so you can know what to endure. And I'm going to be honest every step of the way. And, you know, a lot of people don't have that philosophy because it causes controversy and people care about public image. And a lot of organizations care about public image. And again, if you're putting public image ahead of authenticity, your values are not in the right place. So like, I don't care what people think. I really don't. I don't go to bed at night and I'm like, Susie sent me this message and I'm really worried about all these people attacking me on social media. Like, that's been my whole life. I give no fucks. I give no fucks. I'm going to be who I am. I'm going to tell you like it is. I'm going to tell you my honest account. I'm going to talk to you about other survivors and what they go through in their honest account. Like, when we have people come in the movement perspectives or do anything with us, the one thing I always ask is, are you willing to be authentic with your story? And if people are like, no, I don't feel like I can do that, you're not going forward in perspectives. I want people who are real. And I want people who have the courage to be honest. And I want people who are bold and brave, you know? And I feel like not everyone has that. I'm scared of the backlash from my father. So that's what I was going to say. Like, there will always be backlash if you come out in the public eye. That's always going to happen. There's always going to be people that publicly shame. The way I look at it is like, those people are upholding rape culture. That's really how I'm like, you're upholding rape culture. So like, you're not somebody I'm going to work with. You're not an ally, and it is what it is. What I will tell you about family though is that with my parents, obviously me coming out was very uncomfortable for them, because like, I didn't even come out to my family until like right before I decided to talk about it publicly, because I was so sick of going through everything by myself. And I was just tired of it. And I was like, I really want a community of people that have gone through what I've gone through that can understand. And I like really started looking and there was nothing. So then I was like, why don't I start a community? Because I know I'm not alone. And I just really started researching and looking and educating myself. And then I was like, I'm going to put a community together. And what I will say now is now that my parents are educated on what's going on, and also how big the community has gotten, my parents are happy. Like they're happy that there's a community. They're happy that, you know, people are coming together and that we're fighting back. And, you know, it took a while for my parents to get on board. But even with a lot of the controversial stuff, like having conversations with my parents about these ideologies that really uphold these systems, whether or not they agree with certain practices or them being conservative, because my parents are ultra religious and conservative, and I'm like, woo! I'm like progressive and spiritual. So even with that happening, like my parents have an understanding of like, well, you went through this and you know what the issues are, and whether or not like I fully know, I can't relate to you on the same level. So the choices you're making are based on your life story. So I think, you know, whether or not someone agrees, you just have to do what's right for you. And I think whenever you do what is right for your soul and you work towards healing your soul, the universe is going to protect you and it's going to work out, you know? And I think that's really the best way to look at it. Like, just know when your soul is healing, you're on the right path. And no matter the backlash that comes, whether it's a family member, whether it's public, whether it's people that don't matter, like as long as you're on your soul's journey to heal, because remember, our souls are here to learn and evolve. So when you go through these trials and tribulations, as long as you're working on healing, that's ultimately what matters. I have to work through crap from him before I ever join the service, and I've been working on that. Well, everyone's gonna work on different things, you know what I mean? And healing is a journey of everything. There's a lot of shit: childhood trauma, relationship trauma, miscarriages, sexual violence. Like there's so the list can go on forever. Domestic violence. I've been in therapy for many, many, many years at this point. I feel like I can have like a PhD in therapy. So I could totally understand. And who I was, like who I was before therapy and who I was before I started therapy versus who I am now, like me also like being naked on the internet, like I don't think I would have ever done that. Like had I not been through the levels of therapy I've been on. And also like just not giving a shit what people think about me. I used to be someone that I was like, I'm never telling anyone that I've been through military sexual trauma. I'm never telling anyone I was in the Marine Corps. I'm never telling anyone I was a veteran. I'm not saying a word. I was like, I'm just gonna pretend and assimilate. And like that was pretty much my entire career in finance. And then one day, like, you know what kept happening? I kept relapsing. And when I kept relapsing, I was so tired of relapsing. And I got to a point one day that I was like, fuck it. If I have to live with PTSD and relapses the rest of my life, the whole world is gonna know what this shit is really like. Like I'm gonna blow the whistle and everything because I don't give a fuck. And I remember like I used to be so scared of like, oh, if I say something, the military will assassinate me. I'll die. I'll go missing. I'll get murdered, and no one will ever know it. And now I'm like, fucking whatever. Like, if I go out, I'm going out with a fucking noise. You know what I mean? Like, I'm gonna whistle blow on all this shit because this either changes or I'm going to die trying. And it's like my whole mentality now is like, this is my life purpose, and this is what I'm doing, and that's that. And like, I don't care about other people's opinions. I just don't, you know? And if I have to lose people in the process to fulfill my life purpose, that is what I'm going to do. You know what I mean? And that just comes with that. That's just the journey. Yeah. So I agree with you 100%. And I feel like that's been most of my upbringing. So like as a child, my parents, you know, like my name is Janelle and my last name is Mendez and my middle name's Marina. So it's like I have the whitest white girl first name and then the rest of my name is like ethnic. And like my whole household was like that. It was like be white in public, talk like this. And also like I was always because my parents like both of my parents have accents, right? Like my, you know, very New York City accents. And my mom has like a New York Spanish accent. So she'd be like, hey, let me tell you what happened. Get up, blue. Hey, what are you doing? And like obviously growing up, I would talk like that. And I went to a predominantly white school in Westchester County. They were always correcting my speech. And they were always telling me that the way I talked was too ghetto. And like my parents, both of their languages were Spanish. So here I am, I looked white, but at the same time, my background is like nothing white. Like my household was mad Hispanic growing up. And I mean, it still is. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we don't eat like white people food. You know what I mean? I mean, we make it sometimes, but like my whole house is like totally, and like the way we behave and everything, it's just very cultural. And so like I had to learn to be white to assimilate. And like my parents, you know, like they supported that because they wanted us to have good jobs. They wanted us to fit in with white kids to get a really good education. And that's been a lot of my upbringing. So like also when like it just fucking offends the fuck out of me when people are like, "Oh, you're not behaving so professional." And like I just feel like you have so much potential to really develop into something, but I feel like you're limiting your potential because, you know, if you could be more proper and be more conservative and be more this way, I'm like, so you want me to whitewash myself? And like I grew up in that culture because I lived in a predominantly white area. And like my parents literally thought about naming us all of us white first names so we would assimilate and people would think we're mixed. And you know, and then going to school was like that. It was like everything. Like was like, oh, those hoop earrings you're wearing, like, you know, you might like them now, but when you get a job one day, and I was like, Shh. I started, when I got to finance, like my first couple years, I was very super white girl and like professional. Then like halfway through my career, I was like, fuck it, like I don't care. I would put like true dot earrings on, and I'd be coming to work with my hair curled, and I'm like, what? Like, because that you know, why should I be uncomfortable with that? Or like I would be even in Wall Street, sometimes they would tell me like they would get upset that I would like not do my hair. Like this is my natural hair. And I never like doing my hair. I like my hair naturally. Like I generally enjoy my hair natural and I like having long hair, so I like to protect it. So I don't like doing my hair unless I have to do something like a media event or something like that. Otherwise, my hair's, you know, not, I never do it. So anyway, what ends up happening is like I had this woman too in finance that would tell me I needed to straighten my hair, I needed to do it to look more professional, and that was a white woman, and I was like, shut the fuck up! Like this is my natural hair that I was born with. So it's like you're telling me that I have to do my hair because you're born with straight hair that you don't have to do shit to, and like I should value protecting my hair and the health of my hair over the aesthetics that it looks like. So there's a lot of people that uphold different aspects of white supremacy. Um, it actually makes it a good thing that a few women. Oh, I mean, I've been in a lot of fist fights, like too many to count. Okay, so again, this video, I think a lot of you are gonna have to go back to the beginning and watch because I covered all this. So yes, sexism, racism, discrimination, all like white supremacy in itself. Like I'll give you a great example. 1 in 10 men in the military will go through sexual violence, right? And when you're even looking at that number, so let's say 1 in 20 white men go through sexual violence. That does not mean that white men are eliminated from the risk of white supremacy. It's just more likely that the type of man that would be, so the type of man that'll do the raping is a very masculine, macho, powerful man who upholds the culture, and the guy that's most likely to get raped is the one who doesn't fit the social norms. So white supremacy, it happens to everyone the same way that anyone can uphold white supremacy. So like just because your name is Juanito doesn't mean that you're not a white supremacist. The same thing for the reverse. Just because your name is Michael and you're white doesn't mean you're not going to go through rape. Or just because, you know, you're Janice and you're white doesn't mean you're not going to go through rape. Like white supremacy has dynamics on both sides that are upheld by everyone and that people are victimized by everyone. So it's not as black and white as I think people think. But what I will say is there are a lot of schools in America that don't educate people really on that. Only if they are participating in white supremacy. Right. And you would be surprised how many people really do, which is crazy. I just want to go out of my business in the station, but it was a nightmare. I'm just going through these. Right. So again, I did not say it's just people of color. It's everybody can go through that. So I'm that person too. I'm that person who just does not care. Like if I have to go through hell here on earth, I'm like, oh, y'all gonna learn about this shit. You're gonna learn about what people go through, and I'm gonna tell you all the people that are going through it. So I get it. Like I'm not one to sit quiet either, but like, so this is my problem with the veteran community, right? That frustrates me because I feel that the people who are in organizations that have followers that are leading these organizations, like you have a responsibility to make these changes and to take these bold stances. And when you're taking these bold stances, you also have a responsibility to ensure that you're fighting for everyone, not picking and choosing what you want to do for public image. And that means that you're willing to have honest, authentic conversations about about tearing down the status quo. So, it shouldn't be just a couple of us that are like, so sexism and racism and discrimination are bad. And, when it's public, when everyone's agreeing and, all these states are inspired to act, it's now popular 4 years later. So let's get on board. It should be like, no, we're all going to agree that all of us deserve to be protected, and we're going to tear down this infrastructure and design a new one that benefits everyone, and that's really how it should be. Mine was. Right. So again, just because you go through sexual violence with a minority does not mean that that's not white supremacy, right? Like there's people who uphold white supremacy who participate in it all the time. So it could really be anyone that happens with. All right. So I think we're good with the comments. I'm gonna go over just a couple of more topics that I think is really important. Um, so I'm going to talk about public shaming of people with PTSD, and public shaming of sexuality. So public shaming is when people are telling you how to be, how you should act, how you should behave, how you should look, how you should carry yourself, how you should do your hair, how your makeup should be, how your clothing should be, how you should talk. So like I will tell you, I'm going to actually out this story because so when I went to court, I went to people were like, how dare you wear a corset under your blazer? How dare you do that? And then when I testified, so like I obviously have New York slang, right? And again, my parents' first language is Spanish, not English. So when I talk sometimes, you'll hear my accent or you'll hear like slang that I say. So one of the things that you'll hear me say a lot instead of yes is yeah. I'll be like, yeah, yeah. Or like sometimes I'll talk and I'm like, yeah, what's good? Like what's going on? So I have slang that comes out that's just naturally like the area I grew up in, the household I grew up in. And the same way that I was always told as a little girl that I needed to be more white presenting, to be more professional, and that the way I spoke was too ghetto, I was always told that. And that's because my parents is their first language is not English. So my parents, even though they speak English very well, my parents still have a lot of slang and a lot of things that they say that's like not proper. Like neither one of my parents say like the word them. Like look at them over there, right? And like they say dumb, like, and it sounds like dumb. They'll be like, look at them over there. And that's just part of like the translation of Spanish to English. So both of my parents talk like that. Both of my parents are native Spanish speakers before English. So English is a second language for both of them. So even though I grew up learning English in a really white neighborhood, I always grew up saying like, look at them over there. Or I also grew up saying sandwich instead of sandwich, right? Like I would be like, oh, I want a sandwich because Spanish people typically say sandwich. Give me una sandwich. So I grew up with that. And growing up, like in school, I was always getting pointed out for how I spoke, and how things that I would say, and then they would be like, you need to talk like this. You need to talk like that. So anyway, fast forward to court this year, and people are like, why are you wearing that corset? Not only that, why is she in court? Why is she saying yeah instead of yes? Why is she talking like this? And it's like who the fuck do you think you are to tell me how to talk? Not only that, but like, so the judge told everyone when we went to court that they could not record what was going on. Do you know how many people in Facebook groups started doing watch parties in the court, so they didn't have to sign into court, even though it was a public hearing, started watch parties, didn't think I didn't know about them. I was watching those people in a watch party, watching me talk and testify and hearing everything they were saying about me. Because I was like, if you're going to violate the law anyway, he didn't say I couldn't watch you watching me in court. So you're the one who's violating the law. But there was mad groups of people that were doing these watch parties, and they're like, oh my God, can you believe she's saying yeah instead of yes? And I was like, can you believe that you're breaking the law right now? And like the judge specifically told you this was illegal and you could get in trouble for it. So like, and like you're sitting there to do a watch party to criticize my accent and how I talk. And like, I'm supposed to sit there and then listen to what you have to say when you're coming in to criticize me. Like, so like public shaming is always going to exist. How you talk, how you look, what you wear, how you do your hair. Like there's always going to be somebody who has something to say. And like, as long as you're happy with yourself, who gives a fuck? Like, who gives a fuck? Like those people don't matter. They don't pay your bills. They don't come to your house. They're not doing anything for you. They're not changing society. All they're doing is watching you make moves in life. So like there are people sitting on the sidelines who are like watching the game and they're like criticizing your moves and they're like, I'm cheering for the opposite team. I want to see you go down because I'm not on your team. It's like, why do you care about what those people think? They're not rooting for you or supporting you. So, you know, you don't have to listen to those people. And part of, you know, learning to ignore people who participate in public shaming is learning how to overcome fear and humiliation. So fear, shame, humiliation, all of that stems from your self-worth being deteriorated. So when people are, you know, having these conversations and they are doing these things to you, I just have to be real with your heart, you know, be real with your soul and what feels good to you and what's honest and authentic. And that level of vulnerability, vocal, especially if you're in the public eye a lot, it's going to be hard to be honest because there's always going to be someone who's always saying some shit. There's always going to be someone who has something negative to say, someone who wants to see you fail, someone who's trying to make you fail, someone who's lying about you, someone who's doing propaganda, someone who's saying some shit that's not real, someone who's making up shit that's ridiculous. There's followers that buy into it. Like, there's always going to be people like that. Just do you. You know, whatever feels good to you, whatever's a healthy choice for you in your life and makes you feel empowered, do that. You know, make those healthy choices for yourself. And what's healthy for you might be unhealthy for someone else. There's 7 billion people on the planet. We're not all the same. And that's the beauty of diversity. The beauty of diversity is that all of us and our self-expression is different. And whatever we all choose to do is different for ourselves. So one of the things I want to talk about too is like, it goes back to public shaming with PTSD, but like the good and the bad and the ugly of PTSD. Some people will develop a very strong fight response, and some people will develop a very strong fight response, or both. And in my case, I have an insanely strong fight response, insanely strong. Like my fight response, like if someone's gonna pick a fight with me, I never instigate a fight. It does not align with my value system. You start a fight with me, if I'm in the mood to fight, I'm gonna fucking destroy you. Hands down. Hands down. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. There's good and there's bad and there's ugly to that. And I know that about myself. So like when certain times people instigate fights or they'll do something, I'll be savage as hell. I don't care because at that point you instigated it. So like you deserve what's coming back at you. So like I don't believe in putting out bad karma into the world or like instigating a fight. So like I don't ever like pick on people. I don't ever start a fight. I won't be the first one to do something that harms someone. If there's a violation that someone does to me or does to the movement, I'll become savage. I'll fight and I'll defend myself in the movement and I'll do that at whatever the cost is and I don't care how it makes you feel. So like I'm the kind of person that like you pick a fight, like you be ready for the motherfucking daggers that are gonna come at you because like you're gonna feel pain. I won't start pain and I won't put pain out in the world for no reason. But like if you're coming at me to do that, you're gonna get a fight. Like you're gonna have a fight. It's just gonna happen, right? And that's the reality of it. So anyway, like I'm that kind of person because my fight response is so strong. And do I think that that's a negative aspect of my personality? Absolutely. In some regard, I do. Right. And that's part of having PTSD is like if you ever see people who've gone through sexual violence and have PTSD, generally the fight responses are fucking insane. They're just like, I've climbed up walls before. I've beat up 4 and 5 people with me by myself. Like I have done some crazy loca shit um in the pursuit of me having a PTSD episode. Like that's just happened. And when I get triggered, or someone comes into my territory to trigger me, like I'm at peace. I'm a very peaceful person in my domain. So think about like the best way I could explain it is think of a wild animal. And if you think of a wild animal, like think of a lion or like a bear or something. If you're far away in your own territory and you're not doing any harm, I'm not going to pay attention to you. Like, do whatever you want to do. If you're not like part of my pride, right, or like my crew, and I don't see you as safe, and you're coming into the territory, or like you're a threat, best believe I'm gonna fight. Like, but like be prepared, be motherfucking prepared for a fight. I'm not gonna be like, let's deal with this through diplomacy. If you become a perceived threat or a threat, like I'm gonna come for you, like 100%. And I'm smart enough to figure out how to do it. So the reality of it is like I can figure out how to do it and have the resources to do it. So do I feel like that's a bad part of my personality? I feel like that's yes, but I also feel like it's the same thing that it's a value add because would have the movement been this far? So, like, I'll give you an example. When I got publicly shamed for telling my story for the first time, and people were like, "You're lying. That's not real." If I succumbed to the public pressure of that and how bad that made me feel, um, if I was someone who was like, "I'm going to run away," there'd be no movement in existence today. The 20,000 survivors who engage with us and participate and the resources we have and the conversations we're starting and the media outlets and everything we're doing, none of that would exist. So the reality is like I got even more mad when people fucking started doing that. And I was like, I'm gonna start a movement because you're all fucked up. So I'm gonna start fighting public perception. Then I started the movement and people are like, well, you're not leading it right. You're not doing this. You need to do that. You need to dress like this. You need to behave like this. You need to talk like this. And I was like, I'm just gonna do more stuff that's just gonna fucking piss all of you people off that are trying to stop me from doing the movement and I'm gonna come back harder. Then like I'm getting all these threats. People are trying to kill me, and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna just blow up the movement even more. I'm gonna make it more of a conversation. Oh yeah, you think that's gonna scare me? I'm gonna start more controversy. More people are gonna know about the movement. Oh yeah, like if you think that that's gonna happen, like I'm just gonna keep going with it. Like so, what I'm saying is my fight instinct is so strong that fear does not stop me. So like I could be terrified shitless of something, and if I'm terrified, my adrenaline's gonna turn on, and I'm gonna motherfucking fight. I'm going to fight. So like the thing about it is like there would be no movement in existence if I wasn't like that. And like if you have seen David Letterman with Kanye West, I think it was like the perfect example. So Kanye West went on Dave Letterman, and I don't know if you guys watch my next guest needs no introduction. If you don't watch that, you got to get on it. Best series, hands down. It's like a really authentic account of just elected officials, politicians, movement leaders, celebrities, athletes. It's all of like the people best in their field, and he like uncovers the struggles and adversities they deal with. But the common theme with all of them is that the biggest flaw they have learned to turn it into their greatest asset. And the one that stuck out to me the most was the conversation with Kanye West, right? Because like sometimes you see his posts online and you're like, what is he doing? But then you know that he has bipolar disorder, right? So, or you'll see some of the interviews he does and you're like, what is he doing? And he had this conversation that I thought was brilliant, where he was like, I have all these Grammys. Make the best music. People love my music. People love what I do. People love my fashion. People love all of this. But people get upset about the downside of bipolar disorder. But at the same time, it's my superpower and gives me creativity. And it's like the same thing with the movement. There's a lot of things we've done historically. There's a lot of areas we've been the trendsetter. How we have conversations about sexual violence, how we present the information, how we get engagement, how we built a community, legislation that we've passed, you know, things that we've challenged, being, the lobbying efforts that we've done, the demonstrations that we've done, like everything is cutting edge, everything. And what happens? Years go by, and then the rest of the organizations follow suit. And then they're like, we're the innovators, but they're really not. So they're really the followers to what we're doing because we push societal boundaries to shake up the establishment, to sit there and propel progress. And what ends up happening as a result is that is because for me personally, having PTSD, I've learned to cultivate my fight instinct. That doesn't mean that I don't have downsides to, having PTSD. Like there are some very ugly parts of it. However, I have had to learn to accept that part of myself because in order for me to continue fighting and have that fight instinct in me that helps the movement to keep growing and remain cutting edge, I got to deal with the downside because if I suppress that part of myself, it A, does not feel authentic to me, and B, there would be no movement. I would not have the motivation to do it. Because to lead a movement, it is a constant fight. You're literally fighting for justice. And like people don't realize that it literally is a fight. It's literally a fight. Like no one's handing you civil rights on a platter. Like if they were doing that, MST would have been dealt with as soon as women were in the military. Like that shit would have been dealt with over 100 years ago. And and then also if that was the case, like we wouldn't have passed the first legislation in US history to do what it does. So it's like you got to look at the upsides and the downsides to how PTSD is. And also like being survivors, like obviously a lot of people have these kind of instincts. So it's like, do you sit there and you tell people not to have them? Do you tell people like, because you're not normal, because you have a disability and you don't fit, maybe you should sit on the sidelines and not participate. Oh, if you have a disability, maybe you shouldn't be leading a movement. Well, maybe that's better fit for someone else. And it's like, well, if that was the case, why the fuck didn't they do shit? If the people who were normal and who were healthy were the most capable of affecting change, why did it take someone like me to come along? You know what I mean? Why did it take someone with a disability who's adversely impacted, who has one of the worst types of PTSD to sit there and do this? And because it also takes someone with that level of fight and that level of investment. So like you have to look at everything objectively. Like things are not black and white. The world is not black and white. Everything is made up of good and bad. And I used to have this boss who used to be like, the world is gray, because it's a mixture of everything, and that's the reality of it. And you just got to manage the downside as best you can without impacting the upside that comes with it because nothing's perfect. Everything is a blend of both. That's how we learn, that's how we move on, and that's how we heal. And you cannot move into consciousness without going through struggle. So when people are sitting there having these conversations, like you just got to learn to dismiss certain people because those people are not meant to be leaders. And you have to decide what you want for yourself. You got to be a leader in your life before you're leading anything else. I think there's another thing coming in. I don't know what that means. So like I'm not even gonna answer this. Um yeah, so I think we covered everything for tonight. Let me just see if I missed anything. I mean, there's a couple more things, but we can go over that in another live just because I know I haven't been on doing an in-depth live in a while. But I think today was a pretty good conversation, a lot of engagement, and I think this was a conversation we needed to have. But it is getting a little bit late, and I've been on here for 2 hours, so I'm gonna wrap up, get back to my life, and everything like that. So hopefully, you guys go on and make good and healthy choices for yourself. Love yourself, care about yourself, put yourself first, and just stop caring what people think. Like, they do not determine your life and your well-being, and you do not have to let those thoughts, destroy your inside and who you are. Like, do you be you, be powerful, be beautiful, and ignore the haters. Like, they're always going to be around and they're always going to be doing nothing. So let them hate. And like I said, just make healthy choices for yourself that help you to feel empowered. And I hope all of you have a great night because I'm wrapping up.